A limited liability company is a flexible form of enterprise that blends elements of partnership and corporate structures. An LLC is not a corporation. It is a legal form of company that provides limited liability to its owners in the vast majority of United States jurisdictions. LLCs do not need to be organized for profit. In certain U.S. states, businesses that provide professional services requiring a state professional license, such as legal or medical services, may not be allowed to form an LLC but required to form a very similar entity called a professional limited liability company. Overview: a limited liability company is a hybrid business entity having certain characteristics of both a corporation and a partnership or sole proprietorship. An LLC, although a business entity, is a type of unincorporated association and is not a corporation. The primary characteristic an LLC shares with a corporation is limited liability, and the primary characteristic it shares with a partnership is the availability of pass-through income taxation. It is often more flexible than a corporation, and it is well suited for companies with a single owner. LLC members are subject to the same alter ego piercing theories as corporate shareholders. However, it is more difficult to pierce the LLC veil because LLCs do not have many formalities to maintain. So long as the LLC and the members do not commingle funds, it would be difficult to pierce this veil. Membership interests in LLCs and partnership interests are also afforded a significant level of protection through the charging order mechanism. The charging order limits the creditor of a debtor partner or a debtor member to the debtor's share of distributions, without conferring on the creditor any voting or management rights. Limited liability company members may, in certain circumstances, also incur a personal liability in cases where distributions to members render the LLC insolvent. Flexibility and default rules: the phrase "unless otherwise provided for" in the operating agreement is found throughout all existing LLC statutes and is responsible for the flexibility the members of the LLC have in deciding how their LLC will be governed. State statutes typically provide automatic or default rules for how an LLC will be governed unless the operating agreement provides otherwise. Similarly, the phrase "unless otherwise provided for" in the bylaws is also found in all corporation law statutes but often refers only to a narrower range of matters. The limited liability company has grown to become one of the most prevalent business forms in the entire United States. All 50 states now allow for some form of the LLC business structure, after Wyoming passed enabling legislation in 1977. As the LLC's popularity has swelled, unforeseen issues have emerged in these new statutes, particularly around single-member LLCs, in Florida, New York, California, Colorado, and Georgia, where personal asset protection has been subverted. Effective August 1, 2013, the Delaware Limited Liability Company Act provides that the managers and controlling members of a limited liability company owe fiduciary duties of care and loyalty to the limited liability company and its members. Under the amendment, parties to an LLC remain free to expand, restrict, or eliminate fiduciary duties in their LLC agreements. Income tax: for U.S. federal income tax purposes, an LLC is treated by default as a pass-through entity. If there is only one member in the company, the LLC is treated as AA disregarded and TTA for tax purposes, and an individual owner would report the LLC's income or loss on Schedule C of his or her individual tax return. Thus, income from the LLC is taxed at the individual tax rates. The default tax status for LLCs with multiple members is as a partnership, which is required to report income and loss on IRS Form 1065. Under partnership tax treatment, each member of the LLC, as is the case for all partners of a partnership, annually receives a Form K-1 reporting the member's distributive share of the LLC's income or loss that is then reported on the member's individual income tax return. On the other hand, income from corporations is taxed twice, once at the corporate entity level and again when distributed to shareholders. Thus more tax savings often results if a business formed as an LLC rather than a corporation. An LLC with either single or multiple members may elect to be taxed as a corporation through the filing of IRS Form 8832. After electing corporate tax status, an LLC may further elect to be treated as a regular C corporation or as an S corporation. Some commentators have recommended an LLC taxed as a S corporation as the best possible small business structure. It combines the simplicity and flexibility of an LLC with the tax benefits of an S corporation. Advantages: choice of tax regime. An LLC can elect to be taxed as a sole proprietor, partnership, S corporation or C corporation, providing for a great deal of flexibility. A limited liability company with multiple members that elects to be taxed as partnership may specially allocate the members' distributive share of income, gain, loss, deduction, or credit via the company operating agreement on a basis other than the ownership percentage of each member, so long as the rules contained in Treasury Regulation 1.704-1 are met. S corporations may not specially allocate profits, losses and other tax items under U.S. tax law. Limited liability, meaning that the owners of the LLC, called members, are protected from some or all liability for acts and debts of the LLC depending on state shield laws. Much less administrative paperwork and record keeping than a corporation. Pass-through taxation, unless the LLC elects to be taxed as a C corporation. Using default tax classification, profits are taxed personally at the member level, not at the LLC level. LLCs in most states are treated as entities separate from their members. However, in some jurisdictions such as Connecticut, case law has determined that owners were not required to plead facts sufficient to pierce the corporate veil and LLC members can be personally liable for operation of the LLC, http www.constructionrisk.com 06. LLCs in some states can be set up with just one natural person involved. Less risk to be stolen by fire sale acquisitions. For real estate companies, each separate property can be owned by its own, individual LLC, thereby shielding not only the owners, but their other properties from cross-liability. Disadvantages: although there is no statutory requirement for an operating agreement in most jurisdictions, members of a multiple-member LLC who operate without one may run into problems. Unlike state laws regarding stock corporations, which are very well developed and provide for a variety of governance and protective provisions for the corporation and its shareholders, most states do not dictate detailed governance and protective provisions for the members of a limited liability company. Thus, in the absence of such statutory provisions, the members of an LLC must establish governance and protective provisions pursuant to an operating agreement or similar governing document. It may be more difficult to raise financial capital for an LLC as investors may be more comfortable investing funds in the better understood corporate form with a view toward an eventual IPO. One possible solution may be to form a new corporation and merge into it, dissolving the LLC and converting into a corporation. Many jurisdictions, including Alabama, California, Kentucky, New York, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Texas, levy a franchise tax or capital values tax on LLCs. In essence, this franchise or business privilege tax is the fee the LLC pays the state for the benefit of limited liability. The franchise tax can be an amount based on revenue, an amount based on profits, or an amount based on the number of owners or the amount of capital employed in the state, or some combination of those factors, or simply a flat fee, as in Delaware. Effective in Texas for 2007, the franchise tax is replaced with the Texas Business Margin Tax. This is paid as tax payable equals revenues minus some expenses with an apportionment factor. In most states, however, the fee is nominal and only a handful charge a tax comparable to the tax imposed on corporations. The District of Columbia considers LLCs to be taxable entities, thus eliminating the benefit of flow-through taxes by subjecting members to double taxation. Typically, LLCs will choose to be taxed as a partnership to avoid double taxation, which occurs in corporations. This allows companies to distribute their income among members who then report it on their personal tax returns. Renewal fees may also be higher. Maryland, for example, charges a stock or non-stock corporation $120 for the initial charter, and $100 for an LLC. The fee for filing the annual report the following year is $300 for stock corporations and LLC, and $0 for non-stock corporations. In addition, certain states, such as New York, impose a publication requirement upon formation of the LLC, which requires that the members of the LLC publish a notice in newspapers in the geographic region that the LLC will be located that it is being formed. For LLCs located in major metropolitan areas, the cost of publication can be significant. The management structure of an LLC may be unfamiliar to many. Unlike corporations, they are not required to have a board of directors or officers. Taxing jurisdictions outside the U.S. are likely to treat a U.S. LLC as a corporation, regardless of its treatment for U.S. tax purposes. For example, if a U.S. LLC does business outside the U.S. or a resident of a foreign jurisdiction is a member of a U.S. LLC. The principles of LLCs use many different titles. For example, member, manager, managing member, managing director, chief executive officer, president, and partner. As such, it can be difficult to determine who actually has the authority to enter into a contract on the LLC's behalf. Variations. A professional limited liability company is a limited liability company organized for the purpose of providing professional services. Usually, professions where the state requires a license to provide services, such as a doctor, chiropractor, lawyer, accountant, architect, landscape architect, or engineer, require the formation of a PLLC. However, some states, such as California, do not permit LLCs to engage in the practice of a licensed profession. Exact requirements of PLLCs vary from state to state. Typically, a PLLC's members must all be professionals practicing the same profession. In addition, the limitation of personal liability of members does not extend to professional malpractice claims. A series LLC is a special form of a limited liability company that allows a single LLC to segregate its assets into separate series. For example, a series LLC that purchases separate pieces of real estate may put each in a separate series, so if the lender forecloses on one piece of property, the others are not affected. An L3C is a for-profit, social enterprise venture that has a stated goal of performing a socially beneficial purpose, not maximizing income. It is a hybrid structure that combines the legal and tax flexibility of a traditional LLC, the social benefits of a non-profit organization, and the branding and market positioning advantages of a social enterprise. International equivalents. Companies with limited liability exist in business law worldwide. However, the limited liability company is a specific legal structure defined by the laws of U.S. states, with quite distinct characteristics. Many other countries have similar structures. Argentina, although not an exact equivalent, the Argentine variant of the LLC is called Sociedad de Responsabilidad Limitada, and it limits the liability of its members up to their capital contribution in the company. The equity is divided into equal stakes, each one of which represents a percentage of the company and that can not be traded on the stock exchange. Their bylaws are regulated by Law No. 19550, and the commercial partnership is limited to a maximum of 50 partners. Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnian and Herzegovinian legislation, similarly to that in Croatia, contemplates LLCs as druid vues agrania ina mod governo infinite u. Companies using this structure append the abbreviation DOO to their company name. A shareholder or member in a DOO is only personally liable up to the value of the member unregistered trademark S investment in the company. Brazil. The corporate structure in Brazilian law most similar to the American LLC is the Sociedade Limitada, under the new Brazilian Civil Code of 2002. The Sociedade Limitada is the new name of the Sociedade por Quotas de Responsabilidade Limitada, and it can be organized as empresaria or simples, under this new code, roughly corresponding to the form types of commercial and civil of the Commercial Code. A new law in Brazil has made it legal to obtain an LLC by a sole proprietor called Empresa Individual de Responsabilidade Limitada. The main requirement is capital of 62.200 Riyadh. Bulgaria. Bulgarian legislation contemplates LLCs as THN Euro N Florin TH paragraph TH micron NN TH squared TH 3/4 N TH 3/4 TH cubed N Euro TH degree TH 1/2 TH N TH micron TH 1/2 TH degree TH 3/4 N TH cubed TH 3/4 TH squared TH 3/4 N Euro TH 1/2 TH 3/4 NN. Companies working under this structure append the abbreviation THTHTH to their name. In case of an LLC with individual owner, it is contemplated as THTHTH 1/2 TH 3/4 THTHN TH 1/2 TH 3/4 THN Euro N Florin TH paragraph TH micron NN TH squared TH 3/4 N TH 3/4 TH cubed N Euro TH degree TH 1/2 THN TH micron TH 1/2 TH degree TH 3/4 N TH cubed TH 3/4 TH squared TH 3/4 N Euro TH 1/2 TH 3/4 NN and abbreviated as THTHTHTH. Chile. Chilean law contemplates a certain form of LLC known as Sociedad de Responsabilidad Limitada. Also, these companies are regulated by Law No. Degree 3.918. Among their most important characteristics, we can say that they can pursue a commercial or non-commercial purpose. They must be formed by 2 or more partners and can hold up to a maximum of 50. Their equity is divided into quotas, each one of which represents a percentage of the company. They can be managed by 1 or more managers, or by a board of directors. Their bylaws can't be modified, nor their partners be changed, without the consent of all the other partners. In tax considerations, they differ from the LLCs because they pay a corporate tax for their income, amount that can be deducted by their owners as a credit against the taxes they pay. Chilean law also contemplates a very special kind of individual owner LLC called Empresa Individual de Responsabilidad Limitada, which uses the EIRL abbreviation. Colombian legislation contemplates a very similar structure as mentioned above in the Chilean case. The LTDA abbreviation is also used in Colombia. Croatia. In Croatia, a private limited liability company is termed Društvo osiguranja imovnog infinite, abbreviated DOO. A public limited liability company is termed a dioničko društvo, abbreviated DD. Czech Republic. Czech legislation contemplates LLCs as společnost s ruina imovna 1/2 m. An SRO is not technically comparable to an LLC because the profits are still subject to double taxation. Czech law does not offer a possibility to start up a limited company without the possibility of avoiding double taxation. Denmark, the Danish form of the LLC is the Anpartsselskab. The minimum capital is required by law to be at least 80,000 Danish kroner, before March 1, 2010, 125,000 Danish kroner. Dominican Republic legislation contemplates LLCs as Sociedad de Responsabilidad Limitada, also known by their abbreviation SRL. SRLs award limited liability to their members up to their contribution in the company. This type of company began after the Law No. 479 of the year 2008. Estonia. In Estonia, a limited liability company is referred to as Osar 1/4 Hing. The type of entity is also required to be identified in the name. An O is taxed as a corporation. The minimum capital required by law is a 2,500. Finland, although not an exact equivalent, the Finnish version of the LLC is the OI, or in Swedish AB. An OI is taxed as a corporation. The minimum capital required by law is a 2,500. Germany. Because of its hybrid characteristics, it is very difficult to determine the German equivalent. On one hand, it is possible to consider it as a kind of Gesellschaft mit besserer currency NKTE Haftung because it has aspects of a corporation. On the other hand, it could be considered to be a kind of Kommanditgesellschaft, which is the German equivalent of a limited partnership. Based on the literal translation of the word euro e compagnia euro, an LLC should be considered to be a kind of KG without any liable partner. For the purpose of taxation, The Bundesfinanzministerium gives detailed guidelines of the circumstances under which an LLC is to be considered to be a euro or a corporation a euro or as a euro or a limited partnership a euro. It is useful to note, however, that the original LLC statutes of Wyoming and other U.S. states were more or less explicitly modeled after the GmbH. Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, the limited company is the most commonly incorporated type of company and bears the characteristics of a limited liability company. The core characteristics of a Hong Kong limited company include: I. It requires a minimum of one shareholder and one director. E. A Hong Kong company requires a company secretary resident in HK. E. Foreign ownership is allowed, if company shareholders of limited liability, and B. The company must have registered HK address. Entrepreneurs who register a company in Hong Kong can choose a Hong Kong offshore company. This company structure is basically a HK limited company, but all business is conducted outside of Hong Kong. The advantage of this structure is that all business income that is sourced outside of Hong Kong is tax exempt. Hungary. Hungarian legislation contemplates LLCs as Kollektivföreläse copyright GAR plus or minus tar RSASAG. Companies working under this structure append the abbreviation KFT to their name. Hungarian LLCs were previously required to have a 3 million Hungarian forint starting capital. This amount has been recently reduced and currently the minimum starting capital is 500 KHUF. The time of formation by the new electronic formation option has been reduced from 2 weeks to 2 hours. Additional cost of formation is around 100 KHUF. KFTs can be formed by the cooperation of lawyers. The Hungarian KFT is the most common form of doing business in Hungary. As being part of the European Union, Hungarian KFTs can now obtain an EU VAT registration number for doing business across the EU. The Hungarian EU VAT reg number starts with HU. This way the existence of the subject company, VAT issues and the cross-check is available on the common EU website for companies. Iceland. According to Icelandic legislation, there are two types of LLC forms, private and public-held limited liability forms. Private LLC is abbreviated EHF. The minimum capital of 500,000 Icelandic kr. Public LLC is abbreviated HF. With minimum capital of 4 million kr and goes to LLC. India. In India, LLCs are known as limited companies and is classified broadly into private and public companies. The minimum capital requirement is Rs. 1 lakh for private companies and Rs. 5 lakh for public companies. In India, companies are governed and registered under the Companies Act, 2013. New enactment Limited Liability Partnership Act, 2008 is passed for taking care of smaller firms. Under the California, 1956, every state has one Office of Registrar of Companies under this act. The group of people as prescribed by the act sign together the document memorandum and articles of association and submit to the registrar along with the fees. The registrar, after checking the documents, registers the company and allocates the corporate ID number. Since 2007, the registration is done online and payment of fees is accepted online. Institute of Company Secretaries of India, a statutory body appointed under this act, registers charter member for rendering the services under this act, to the corporate. Then company can apply for PAN card, bank account, apply for issue of shares, or apply for loan to the banks and FIs. The company must include limited at the end of the name of the business for public companies and private limited for private companies. Also, the company is taxed as a separate entity distinct from its shareholders. Italy. The Italian Civil Code, approved in 1942 and as amended by the Government Act 6/2003 and furthers modifications, mainly provides three forms of limited liability company: Società per azioni. The minimum required starting capital for an SPA is a 120,000. The capital is divided into shares that can be transferred by endorsement or bought and sold on stock exchange. Only SPAs can be quoted in stock exchange market, issue corporate bonds and other financial instruments. SPA form and a higher capital are required by law to operate in protected businesses, Società o Responsabilità Limitata. The minimum required starting capital for an SRL is a 10,000. Its capital is divided into stakes which can be bought or sold just by notarial act. SRLs can issue corporate bonds but are subject to many limitations. Similar to SRL is Società Cooperativa o Responsabilità Limitata, whose scope is not making profit but give benefits to stakeholders. Società in accomandita per azioni. The minimum required starting capital for a SAPA is a 120,000 divided into shares. SAPAs have a mixed liability scheme, where standard shareholders have limited liability while managing shareholders have full liability. Except this, SAPAs are exactly like SPAs even if uncommon. Companies append the corresponding abbreviation to their company names. Japan passed legislation in 2006 creating a new type of business organization, Godo Kesha, a close variant of the American LLC. Japanese tax authority does not consider JLLC a pass-through entity, but as a taxable entity. In Latvia, a limited liability company is referred to as Sabiedrība Obija 3/4 atbildību. Abbreviation SIA is usually added before the company name. SIAs are recorded in a public register called Register of Enterprises. The minimum share capital required for SIA is €2,800 European euros. Macedonia, Republic of Macedonian legislation contemplates LLCs as THN Euro N Florin NNTH squared TH 3/4 NTH 3/4 TH 3/4 TH cubed N Euro TH degree TH 1/2 TH NTH micron TH 1/2 TH degree TH 3/4 TH TH cubed TH 3/4 TH squared TH 3/4 N Euro TH 1/2 TH 3/4 NN. Companies working under this structure append the abbreviation TH 3/4 to their name. The minimum required starting capital for a DOO is a 5,000. Mexican legislation contemplates LLCs as Sociedades de Responsabilidad Limitada, also known for their abbreviation SDRL. SDRLs award limited liability to its members up to their contribution in the company and also act as pass-through or flow-through entities whereby profits are passed through to its members, avoiding double taxation. This type of company is widely used by foreign investors in Mexico because of its pass-through modality and its check-the-box capability under the IRC. Moldovan legislation contemplates LLCs as Societate Cubic Rankin Florin Spunder Limitata Florin, abbreviated SRL, and a regulated member, S, founder, S, and other non-founder members, minimum 1 member founder and maximum total of 50 members, at least one of them must be the founder of the company, but all of the 50 could be also founders. Netherlands. In the Netherlands, the equivalent to an LLC is a Beletten Vennootschap, but a BV is a separate legal entity. Its name always starts or ends with the letters BV. Effective October 1, 2012, the minimum capital requirement of 18.000 has been abolished, so that AA001BV is now possible. The Civil Code now also allows different classes of shares, so that a BV is much more flexible than it used to be. BVs are taxed on profits, but not on royalty income or capital. Audits are only required if 2 out of 3 conditions exist: 1 revenue greater than a 12M, 2 assets are greater than a 6M, 3. More than 49 employees in the Netherlands. Norway. In Norway, the closest to an LLC is an aksjeselskap. However, this type of entity does not have an option to elect for pass-through taxation such as an LLC in, for example, the United States. This means that both the profits of the company and the dividends from the company are taxed. Its name always starts or ends with the abbreviation AS or ASA. Minimum capital of an AS is 30,000 Norwegian kroner. Pakistan. In Pakistan, LLCs are known as private companies that end with private Ltd. They should have at least Rs 100,000 as their minimum paid-up capital. The Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan has made it mandatory for all listed companies to file their documents, returns, accounts and applications through the Commission's e-Services online filing facility. Earlier, this requirement was only applicable to the companies which had been incorporated through e-Services online filing facility. Peru, there is no direct equivalent of an LLC in Peru, but some similar corporate forms include, Sociedad Ana Cubnima Cerrada, a corporation which must have at least 2 and not more than 20 shareholders. Its shares may not be offered to the public and cannot be traded on the stock exchange. Sociedad Comercial de Responsabilidad Limitada, a commercial partnership divided in equal participations which may not be called shares. It must have at least 2 and not more than 20 partners. Sociedad Civil de Responsabilidad Limitada, a professional partnership of at least 2 and not more than 30 individuals, with co-owner participation in the form of capital, of professional contribution, or of any combination of both. Empresa Individual de Responsabilidad Limitada, a legal entity with one single owner. The capital for any of the above entities is freely determined by its statutes. There is no minimum requirement except for entities with certain types of activities, mainly in the financial markets, and then irrespective of their type. Poland. In Poland, a limited liability company is referred to literally as a Euro-OE company with limited liability Euro in speech. However SP.ZOO has a legal personality and is considered to be a Euro-OE corporation. The minimum start capital is 5,000 Polish zloty. Portugal. In Portugal, LLCs are called Sociedades de Responsabilidade Limitada, that is, company of limited responsibility, usually abbreviated LDA. They are tax subject, and company shares cannot be sold in a public market. Since 2006 the transference of them is not required to be done in the presence of a civil law notary, except if the company owns buildings, in the same way other major properties have to be sold. Nonetheless, the responsibility of the partners is limited to the capital share they hold, and the minimum capital required by law for a LDA of just a 1. Romania. Romania recognizes the limited liability company since 1990 under the name of Societate cu Florin Limitada Florin, in which the owners are personally liable for the company obligations within the limit of their contribution to social capital. The minimum start capital is 200 Romanian leu, which currently amounts to less than a 50. Russia. In Russia and certain other former Soviet countries, an entity with a somewhat similar structure is known as a TH plus or minus n permel TH micron n TH squared TH 3/4 n TH 3/4 TH cubed n euro TH degree TH 1/2 TH n TH micron TH 1/2 TH 1/2 TH 3/4 TH to the first TH 3/4 n TH squared TH micron n on n TH squared TH micron TH 1/2 TH 1/2 TH 3/4 n and on, usually abbreviated OOO, or in some CIS countries as on OO. Although a Russian limited liability company shares the same name with an American LLC, it is different in many ways. Most importantly, a Russian LLC is not tax transparent. The company is taxed at the corporate level, and then, upon distribution of dividends, shareholders pay income tax. A limited liability company is the most popular form of legal undertaking in Russia for simple shareholding structures. The minimum capital required is 10,000 Russian rubles. Serbia. Serbian legislation contemplates LLCs as druit fuzar agrania ina mod governo infinite u. Companies working under this structure append the abbreviation DOO or DOO to their name, same as in Croatia. As in the Czech Republic, a DOO is not technically comparable to an LLC because the profits are still subject to double taxation. Slovakia. In Slovakia, the law contemplates spoločnost jen ruina emovnzina 1/2 m or as the rough equivalent of a limited liability company. It is very popular form of business organization due to insurance of limited liability in exchange for a relatively small investment into the registered capital. From 1 to 50 associates can found it through a founding agreement with minimum registered capital of 5,000, minimum of 750 per person, in money or other property. Slovenia. Slovenian legislation contemplates LLCs as drua 3/4 bar z homogeno od governostjo. Companies working under this structure append the abbreviation D. O. O to their name. The minimum required starting capital for AD. O. O is a 7,500. Due to the high cost and complicated bookkeeping of a real corporation, this is a more widespread form. Spain. In Spain, LLCs are called Sociedad de Responsabilidad Limitada, Company of Limited Responsibility, or Sociedad Limitada, or Limited Partnership. They are tax subject, and company shares cannot be sold in a public market, the transference of them having to be done compulsorily in the presence of a civil law notary, in the same way other major properties have to be sold. Nonetheless, the responsibility of the partners is limited to the capital share they hold, and the minimum capital required by law for a SL is at least 3,000. Sweden. Sweden has no equivalent of an LLC. The closest company form is the Handelsbolag. The Swedish AB, like the Handelsbolag, is a tax subject and is more similar to a US C corporation than an LLC. The minimum capital required by law in an aktiebolag is 50,000 Swedish krona, although this may be in the form of assets as well as capital. It should be noted that the AB structure requires shareholders, a board of directors, and regular meetings of both, together with complete audited accounts once per year. Creation or purchase off the shelf of an AB is relatively cheap and tax-effective, but liquidation of a created aktiebolag can be an expensive and time-consuming operation. Creation of public limited liability companies, or aktiebolag, quoted on the stock exchange, requires a minimum capitalization of 1 million Swedish krona. However, the overall regulation of public companies in Sweden, especially regarding accounting methods and taxes, is thorough and detailed. Switzerland. The Swiss Code of Obligations provides for different kinds of companies with limited liability. The two most commonly used are, Swiss Limited Liability Company. The terms for this kind of company used in the three official languages of the Swiss Confederation are as follows: in German Gesellschaft mit Beschränkungsrecurrency NKTE Haftung, in French Social Copyright Copyright Responsabilité Copyright Limite Copyright and in Italian Società Garanzia Limitata. A Swiss LLC is similar to a LLC with respect to various matters, including the following: members may also be natural persons, corporations, partnerships or other LLCs. The liability of a member of a Swiss LLC to pay for the LLC's obligations is limited to its capital contribution. A Swiss LLC may be either member-managed or manager-managed, and, unless otherwise provided for in the operating agreement, the member's unregistered trademark right to control or manage a Swiss LLC is proportionate to their individual membership interest. The membership interests in a Swiss LLC have to be registered and, thus, they may only be issued in the name of a member but not to the bearer. Swiss corporation. The terms for this kind of company used in the three official languages of the Swiss Confederation are as follows: in German Aktiengesellschaft, in French Social Copyright Copyright Anonyme and in Italian Società Anonima. A Swiss corporation is with respect to various matters different from a LLC. Most important is that a Swiss corporation may, neither by default nor by exercising any respective option provided by the Swiss law, be member-managed like a LLC, as the respective mandatory provisions of Swiss law provide that the board of directors has certain non-transferable duties. Furthermore, the shares of a Swiss corporation may also be issued to the bearer and, thus, not only in the name of a holder, which, however, applies to the membership interests in a Swiss LLC, which may only be registered. Tajikistan. In Tajikistan, same as in Russia, an entity with a somewhat similar structure is known as O paragraph th degree th 1/4 nsh th nn th 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 3/4 n euro th 3/4 th th 1/4 th degree nn sh n florin th th nn th th 1/4 th degree o cubed th n florin th, abbreviated as O paragraph th thuetho. Ukraine. This type of entity exists in this country since the 1990s. In Ukrainian, It is spelled th3/4 th² th degree n euro thnn th² th3/4 th3/4 th plus or minus th1/4 th micron th paragraph th micron th1/2 th3/4 n th² n th th3/4 th² n th degree th noeth 1/2 nn. In transliteration towarzystwo z obmyślnoja odpowiedzialnością, that is, company with limited liability. United Arab Emirates. This type of entity exists in the UAE states as a widely accepted way to do business and is referred as LLC. United Kingdom. The new form of limited liability partnership, created in 2000, is similar to a US LLC in being tax neutral. Member partners are taxed at the partner level, but the LLP itself pays no tax. It is treated as a body corporate for all other purposes including VAT. Otherwise, all companies, including limited companies and US LLCs, are treated as bodies corporate subject to United Kingdom corporation tax if the profits of the entity belong to the entity and not to its members. United States. A limited liability company is a relatively new business structure authorized by state statute. The LLC is chiefly inspired by the GmbH, a type of business organization in Germany, and by the Limitada, a type of business organization available in many Latin American countries. In the United States, the first Limited Liability Company Act appeared in Wyoming in 1977 as special interest legislation for an oil company. In 1980, the Internal Revenue Service issued a private letter ruling to an LLC formed under the Wyoming LLC Act, indicating that the IRS would treat the LLC as a partnership for federal tax purposes. However, later that year, the IRS proposed regulations that would deny partnership classification to any business entity in which no member bore personal responsibility for the entity's liabilities. In 1982, Florida adopted an LLC Act modeled on Wyoming's LLC Act. Due to uncertainty over the tax treatment of LLCs, no other states introduced LLC legislation until after 1988. In 1988, the IRS issued a revenue ruling stating that it would treat a Wyoming-style LLC as a partnership for tax purposes. By 1996, nearly every state had enacted an LLC statute. The National Conference of Commissioners on Uniform State Laws adopted the Uniform Limited Liability Company Act in 1996 and revised it in 2006. A potential disadvantage specific to the United States is that LLCs are not considered to be corporations for the purposes of federal civil procedure. They are instead treated as partnerships. This affects the applicability of diversity jurisdiction in cases involving LLCs, barring application of diversity jurisdiction when even one member of the LLC is a citizen of the same state as one of the opposing parties. Should one member of an LLC be a citizen of a state of which one of the opposing parties is a citizen, any case between the LLC and those parties must be heard in that state's courts. Corporations enjoy a more complete legal personhood that only denies diversity jurisdiction when the opposing party is a citizen of the state in which the corporation is incorporated or has its principal place of business. AOL was set up as a LLC during its ownership by Time Warner from 2001 to 2008. There is a similar setup for BMW's American subsidiary, BMW of North America, LLC. Chrysler has been an LLC since restructuring during the auto industry bailout of 2009, with a majority stake held by Fiat S.p.A., see also, Gesellschaft mit Beschränkung NKTE Halfton, a German form of the LLC, Belleton Benowatschap, a Dutch private limited company, Socia Copyright tar Copyright Responsabilité Copyright Limité Copyright E, LLCs in French-speaking countries, Incorporation, Limited Liability, LLP, Series LLC, Wholly Foreign-Owned Enterprise, Types of Business Entity, Uniform Limited Liability Company Act, Good Standing, List of Company Registers, References. External links, http, www.expat.org Company Establishment HTML